So Tim Lalonde is the president of JAT Solutions. He's been working with leading edge companies for a long time to be competitive and effective. Now, let me start by saying that Tim was a client of mine when I was at IBM, and he was at Justice in OPS. This is going back to 2003, and we were both involved in a transformation at the time. He is now working closely with IBM in his current role and was presenting at the IBM conference, Think 2023 last week. So Tim's specialization is in developing business roadmaps, leveraging technologies, creating and supporting change with a focus on re-engineering, project management, architecture, and so on. So he has had a wonderfully diverse background, and he has worked in all areas of IT. So lots of experience, 30 years. And I see his guiding principle there is keep it simple. See a problem, fix it. I think Tim is one of the most reflexive practitioners I know. He always wants to understand why things have happened. And I think this is because he is passionate about learning. So that's great for us because he wants to pass on knowledge to us, and he always does this with his team. And I suspect that this is one of the traits that he honed probably started with his time in the military. So thank you, Tim, for coming today and for presenting at today's summit. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Mark, for that. It's quite humbling to hear that. So, especially somebody with your background. So, thank you for that. I'll just go through. It's a relatively high-level presentation, and like to what Mark said, I'm a silverback, been in this game for over 30 years. I typically get brought into engagements to help organizations who can articulate where they want to go, but they don't know how to get there, so they're struggling with that. Or I've been brought in to work on engagements where their objectives aren't being met and they need someone to right the ship. So that's typically where I come in, and from that, my background is more about taking a very pragmatic approach to how it all works. So, excellent. Having said that,
Tim, before you get in too far, can you share your camera for us too, please?
Oh, okay. I moved my camera, so I wasn't sure if that was going to make everybody. I'll just have to. I'll have to.
You're good now.
Yeah, I'll just change the size of my head because I'm sure that now I look like a Max Headroom or something. And I've dated myself for those of you who don't know who Max Headroom is. So from the perspective of the brief today, it's how your style, if you're going to create a PMO, and how that reflects the organization and whether the organization is in alignment to that. Now, what's interesting is that this whole presentation is based on an academic paper that was written, and I'll give you the details a little bit later, but it goes back to what both Kevin has said and both what Mark has said and the panel has said, is that how we are getting here, we're all faced with similar challenges. There's probably over 100 people on this call, and kind of a philosophy that I have is we're all in the chairs that we are in today. I cannot change how I got to today at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, but I can change what I'm doing from here. And that's the approach that what I find that PMOs have to do, and this presentation will follow that strategy. So the relatively simple, gonna have a basic introduction, and then typical to how I look at things, I'd like to take 3 passes at a problem. So what's the strategic pass, what's the tactical pass, and what's the operational pass? And today we're gonna focus on culture. So what's the culture of an organization in the PMO and all of the stakeholders involved? And then finally, bringing it all together, that will actually loop in much of what Kevin has said, the panelists, and as well as Mark. So you've heard from some phenomenal leaders. I was just taken aback by the dearth of information that came from the panelists, and Kevin's extreme background and just depth of knowledge, and Mark and the deep research he's done about how we got to where we are. So you've heard about all of that and how to build for purpose. But the culture of an organization is very much alive and well, and all of us need to be very respectful of the fact that organizations, regardless of whether it's nonprofit, public sector, or whatever, have gotten to where they are by some form of success. So whenever you're trying to introduce change, you need to understand that the organization will always, by definition, be resistant because there is a belief of its structure from being there. And offices impact the success of it. Project management offices impact that. So the research paper is based on, it's called The Rational Typology of Project Management Office. It was written in 2013, very valuable then, extremely valuable in 2013, and it was written by the parties listed there. So this presentation is just a overview or a presentation based on that paper. I would encourage everyone to read the paper. It is very, very detailed. It's incredibly thought-provoking and is very representative of the challenges that we're faced with. The other thing is that I'm going to talk about how my engagements with project management offices, how I've created them, and I will take the nod based on the statistics said earlier. I am currently batting 1,000%. Like I believe Gary, I've got over 4 PMOs that I've built, different organizations, both private and public sector, and all of them are still alive and well, to quote Gary earlier, and how that can be done. And for the purposes of this, innovation is Brave New World projects, and then operational, which is rinse and repeat, which is going to speak heavily to where Mark was speaking to in regards to what are the realities of organizations that are operationally focused, but the PMO needs to be innovative, or you're in a startup organization where the organization is very innovative, but the PMO is very operationally focused. So we're going to speak heavily about that and my experiences and how to deal with that. But the spirit of the presentation is to guide you in the understanding of culture and where that culture can lead to the success and where it can also lead to failure. And you're going to hear me say a phrase frequently: lift versus carry. So lift is exactly what you would envision. It's the lift to do something new. I've never done it before, but I got to do the lift. And then the carry is the steady state. So what organizations sometimes struggle with is that the skills and the effort to do the lift are inconsistent to what is required to keep the carry going. And sometimes they will burden both sides of that equation unnecessarily because they haven't recognized that there is a difference. And the project management office is the office that can bring that to the stakeholders' attention. Again, speaking to what Kevin spoke about, what Mark spoke about, and more importantly, what the panel spoke about. The word orange. Did you see the color or the fruit? This is one of the things that drives my team crazy because I bring it up a lot. And I say this phrase, I'm saying we're going to have the orange conversation because confirmation of understanding is critical to every engagement. So today I'm in a room full of over 100 people that are from PMOs or project managers. And if I said the word PMO, we're all going to have a baseline understanding that will be relatively close to each other. Now I'm going to bring the organization into the room. And I believe the lady from the energy board talked about, you say the word PMO and they think it's a 4-letter word. That's true because there's a misunderstanding. There's not a baseline. So what I find when I'm working with organizations, especially when I'm trying to build a PMO, is does everybody have an agreement? So going back to Kevin's objectives based. So what's the goal of this? What's the spirit of the engagement? What's the intent of the organization when they build their PMO? Clarify the orange, and you must clarify it repeatedly, and both the project level and such. So this is a tool that I have in my kit bag that when I'm sensing anxiety in the group or I'm sensing anxiety in the project, I'll have a level set meeting. And I'll say, okay, we're going to have the orange conversation. Can we agree on what the word PMO means? Or can we agree on what the word X means? And at first, people will get Tourette's and they'll get, they'll push back. But eventually they start to understand that a lot of the anxiety that's being forced or seen is because there's not an alignment. So Kevin and Mark spoke heavily about operationally focused versus innovation focused. What do those words mean? And what does it mean within your organization? The next one is also very important when I get brought in. And this is something that I speak with a lot of my teammates, a lot of my colleagues, a lot of my project managers that are struggling, is we use what's called the OODA loop. So it was done by John Boyd. He was a lieutenant colonel in the US military, and his strategy was absolutely incredible. And what he found and what obsessed him with was, why am I better at something than an equally trained person? So he was a fighter pilot, he was a Top Gun, and he couldn't understand. He had exactly the same training as every other pilot. He was in by definition, a lower quality aircraft, and yet he could dominate his peers, and he couldn't understand why. So he reached into the past, similar to what Mark did in regards to lessons from history, and said, why am I able to do something differently than somebody else? And what uncovered when he studied major battles of the past was he did not study it from the victor's perspective. He studied it from the losing side's perspective. So why did the losing side lose when they had superior tools and techniques and armies and so on and so forth? And what he found was that when you took an approach that said you observe something and just passively observe it. So to my teams, I say you have 2 eyes, 2 ears, 1 mouth, use them accordingly. So just observe what's going on. The purpose of this presentation is orient. So orient yourself. So apply your knowledge to what you're looking at. So this is when I start to delve into the culture of an organization. So I start to orient myself. So I notice there's lots of people from the police force on the call. They're very operationally focused. They tend to be command and control. They tend to be, everything's got to be in a standard operating procedure. And there's a reason for that. It has to do with life safety and so on and so forth. I work with other industries that are in mining or health or public sector, but they have a baseline that says what is their pattern, what's the stripes on their zebra. Orient yourself to that. Then you need to make a series of decisions and options. What are my options based on what I just looked at, how I've oriented myself to that? But the step that a lot of people fail to do, and this is what Mark speaks to, is you need to act on it. You need to actually execute one of the options. And then when you execute that option, how did that impact what you were looking at? So if we look at it from a project lens perspective, you've done a project, and the whole reason you do a post-mortem on is what was the lessons that was learned, so that the next time you do it, then you will fix that problem. So that's where this OODA loop, so I constantly have the orange conversation with my clients and with my teammates and with the stakeholders. And then I also have an internal thing that I work with my teams that says, where are you in the OODA loop? Are you in the stakeholders OODA loop? So are you not necessarily guiding them along, or are they directing you to go someplace that is not in the benefits? So those are the things that you have to do. Now, on a complete side note, I coach basketball, and I use this OODA loop to teach young girls and young boys how to do motion offense and how to do motion defense. So it's not just about project management or military strategy. It's just about how do you fix a car that's not working, or how do you deal with a leaky roof? It's make an observation. What are you looking at? Orient yourself to your knowledge, make a decision, act on that decision, and did it improve or did it make it worse? So those are the kind of things that I encourage people that are taking on the big challenges of building a PMO to take a step back and realize that it is a craft. I seriously take project management as a craft. And what are the things you need to do to hone that craft? And these are the 2 basic tool sets that says if you understand the OODA loop and you understand that most engagements create friction when there's a misunderstanding on where you're going or a particular term. And I deal a lot with that when you get strong technical teams, strong engineering teams, whether it's in the construction industry or in the IT field, is they have a baseline understanding of something, and yet the people they're talking to have a different representation of that baseline. So they're both believing they're talking about the same thing, but they're looking at it from 2 different sides of the same equation, and therefore can create conflict. And sometimes the project management office needs to be there to understand those differences and to explain those differences, to be the translator, as it were. So again, a long way of saying, what is a culture? And the purposes of this presentation, going back to the orange conversation, is it's learned and shared patterns of thought and behavior characteristics of a given group, plus the material objects produced and used by that group. So for the purposes of this presentation, this is what we're going to call culture. We may have different perspectives of it, but for the next 11 slides, this is what we're going to refer to as culture. Now, all of us today have heard from some phenomenal guests, speakers, and some great details. But ultimately, the PMO is a part of an organization. It has project managers, but the thread that holds us all together is the project. So this Venn diagram, which is again as old as time, is to remind everybody that we all have a part to play. And where are we in that conversation? Where at any given moment in time, am I the PM? Am I representing the PMO? Am I just a player within the project, or am I representing the organization? And at any given time, a single person can represent more than one role and be in one different area. And sometimes I have to remind people, for this particular moment, what role are you playing? And sometimes that little nudge along the line can help. So from that perspective, the organization, is it operationally focused? So if it's operationally focused, like to previous presenters, they're all about exploiting efficiencies, taking seconds off the lap. How do I improve where I am? Or is it a project's benefits focused? So these are organizations that are startups. They're organizations that everything they do is net new. So it might be a custom manufacturing facility, or it could be something that says, you know what, we're always doing something new. Startups are the best example. So they want to explore opportunities. They want to go out and look to see what's out there that I didn't know. But organization focused organizations, manufacturing, policing is one. Those ones are very, very much focused on seconds off the lap, and transportation, where I have a long background in, as well as also very operationally focused. So from a PMO's perspective, if your organization is in one of those two categories, what's your maturity level? Where is the PMO in this equation? Is it a large one? What's the size? The role, is it an influence role where all you're bound to is influence, or do you have accountability? Are you actually accountable for things? So again, from where you are in that moment in time, where are you? From the project manager perspective, is it a coaching style that's required? So a coaching style is looking for gaps. It's looking for what is the unknown. You're working with the team members to solve problems. And then there are other project managers that you need that are checklist based. They're all about avoiding the gaps. They're keeping the team focused on time, budget, and scope. That they have a requirement that says, you know, I need to be more focused on that. So again, the project manager is, you know, what role are you playing in this case? Does this engagement require me more to move it along, or is this engagement more to make sure that everything is the scorekeeping is going properly, because the teams are well oiled, they don't need my influence, everything is going the way it should be. But the one that most people forget, and this is the one where I'm usually brought in on, is a particular engagement, a particular project. And it speaks a lot to what both Kevin and Mark spoke to at the beginning, is this particular engagement, is it innovative? And that's a word that I choose to use, which is maybe different than other people. But what I mean by that is it brave new world? Have I ever done this before? So some of the examples I can use is I'm moving my infrastructure into the cloud, and I'm going to do it as an infrastructure as a service. There's a lot of similarities there, but it is brave new world. But what if I'm taking that infrastructure and I'm going to go to a platform as a service? It looks and smells the same, but it's different. So that's an innovative project. And the baseline that I tell my project managers is, have we organizationally done this before? Others may have done this before, but organizationally, have we done this before? If not, it's innovative. And then you need to just think about it differently. The next one is it operational? Is it rinse and repeat? It's I've done one of these, I'm going to do the next 50. So in one example, I'm going to put in a new operating system. Okay, so yep, the first one's new. Yep, first one's innovative. After I get to the second or third one, and I got 100 of them to do, it's operational now. So I can give it the operational lens. And the gentleman that spoke from the construction industry, when you were in residential, the first couple that you did, Brave New World, lessons learned, so on and so forth. Then it became rinse and repeat. Then you got into institutional. Oh, that's net new. We haven't done that before. What's different? So you want to go look for gaps. You want to go in and find the holes that are there. So from a culture perspective, you need to be able to guide your organization that says, for this engagement, is it a rinse and repeat or Brave New World? And then that becomes pivot points for you. Now, from a project management style perspective, this is what I found fascinating when I was listening to the panelists, is that their PMOs kind of were all different, but they were the same. They all had the title PMO, some of them formal, some of them informal, but they were acting in those roles. Some of them were very clear. We're a serving PMO. We serve. Others were controlling, where no, we have the standards, we have the rules, we have accountability, everybody's going to use these tools. And then there was this other group that says, you know what, sometimes we have to partner, sometimes we have to share resources, so on and so forth. So ultimately, there's three styles. It can be a serving style, a controlling style, and a partnering style. So it's like, there is no magical math here. It's just what works for the organization that you're in, but more importantly, identifying where you fit, right? Where do you fit as a person? Where does the PMO fit it? Where does the organization fit? So if you look at that, serving, you're servicing to others, you're doing administration, it's coordination, it's guidance, you're doing lots of training, which again was spoken of, you're doing about project performance. But the key word here is everybody in the PMO, every project manager always has influence. And I say this across all of the people I deal with, never sacrifice your craft. If you are in the role of a project manager, even though you may not do it full time, it may be just for this side of the desk engagement, it is a craft, respect the craft, you always have influence. Never give up your influence just because the organization isn't necessarily understanding of it. It's just like you would never ask a tradesman to forget every skill that they've learned in doing what they're doing. So you want the craft to be always honored and you always have influence. In a controlling world, you actually have the management of projects. You're now responsible and accountable for that. You have templates that you're forcing the standards. You can enforce compliance. You do evaluations. More importantly, you do surveillance. And lastly, you have the authority to act. So if something is non-conformant, you can actually act. So there's the old adage, people don't do what you expect, they do what you inspect. So a controlling PMO is very much making sure that PMOs are well trained, they all have the same standards, they're onboarded properly. All of the things that are recipes for success, that's a controlling PMO. And that's ultimately the types of PMOs that most organizations envision when they hear the word PMO. And then the waters get muddy when they start moving away from either serving or controlling. And then partnering is exactly that. It's a little bit of both. Much more collaboration, lots of cross-pollination, cross-domains. Center of excellence tends to be the word of the day, where other PMOs, other project managers are coming there. They're pooling resources, they're sharing best practices, but very much lateral communications. They're going across the board. They're sharing of resources, and it's an integrated RACI. So responsible, accountable, consulted with an informed, it's very integrated. So any given engagement, they're going to be moving back and forth. So those are the realities of PMOs. Most organizations come up from the serving side. Most, that's not always the case. In one particular one where I set up, it was specifically set up to be controlling, and that was going to be the dictate from the stakeholders. And because of their leadership, it was very successful. Other ones, the stakeholders needed to be educated. They needed to be informed on how all this works, because they didn't know what it was, but it was easier for them to understand it in the rearview mirror. So they were able to look backwards and go, oh, okay, now I get it. But they needed individuals to lift them into that serving mode, or into more of a partnering and controlling mode. Now we look at it from, this is right out of that research paper. So it's just graphically looks different, but it's the same principle. So the roles, you can either be a superordinate role, you can be a subordinate role within the PMO, you can be balanced, or you can be a co-equal. But the key here is that if you're serving, you tend to exploit efficiencies. If you're in the controlling side of the equation, you're much more keen on exploring, that you're really trying to push the organization to find those gaps. It's the search of the unknown, so that when it does go to steady state, it's far more supportable, it has a much higher level of success, and you're able to realize the benefits. And partnering is that ability to bridge the two worlds, because sometimes partnering is going to force you to go left or right on that side. But the balanced approach is that ability that says, you know what, in any given engagement, I may need to be more subordinate. On another one, it needs leadership, so I'm going to be subordinate or superordinate. Other times, nope, the actual engagement teams in the project management office are nicely aligned. We're going to be co-equals, lots of stuff going on. And those are those decision points that you, as a person inside the PMO, needs to educate your organization on. But the key takeaway from this is, are you focused on exploiting seconds off the lap or exploring new opportunities? And all of us have the opportunity to make that decision at any given point. So subordinate is very much active and controlling and accountable. Superordinate, that is their raison d'etre, is to make sure that everybody is playing nicely in the sandbox and they're following the rules. Subordinate is very passive, service-oriented, influence. How can I help? It's a constant conversation of how can I help? Co-equal is, again, more partnering, more collaboration, more coaching. And this is where you start to see that style really come forward, in that ability of when you can get an organization to see the PMO as a value-added player on the larger team, as opposed to a referee or scorekeeper. And that's that ability to change the mindset of an organization. And then balance is, again, it's very hybrid. It's adaptable. It's for this given involvement, I need to do this or I need to do that. It's very matrix reporting. Nobody, like lots of people, lots of domains need to be informed, so on and so forth. Very consultative, very much, you know, you're going involved, you're trying to figure out what's going on, you're focusing on the why, that kind of stuff. But the real key message here is, are you looking to exploit or are you looking to explore? And sometimes you need to understand that this engagement needs to be heavy one way or the other, or balanced. So exploit is all about operational efficiency. That is what drives you. It is, again, you're a franchise, you're Tim Hortons and you're building franchises. The first couple that you did with the new style, everything was Brave New World. You had to do lots of report backs. You had to figure out where the efficiency was. And then after that, it's just bang, 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 get them in, get them out. Then when you change your redesign, you got to go through a proof of concept again. You got to go through that again. So no particular organization needs to be all in on one style, but they need to understand that there is a difference between being innovative, net new, or exploiting seconds off the lap. And in an exploit world, it's all about avoiding the slack. It's all like, no, everything's got to be accounted for. Whereas in explore, no, I've got people on the bench. I got people from other expertise. I got more cash I can draw from. What I want to leverage that slack. And I've actually built it into the project. I've allowed for contingency. And again, similar to what Kevin and Mark were saying, highly focused on the benefits. That's what drives you, because the costs are a reality of what you're doing. And of course, you've always got to report the costs, but it's not what you're going to be measured against. It's, are you achieving the goal? And what I always tell my project teams when we're working on these types of projects is, what's the spirit of the engagement? Is the spirit of the engagement is X. So in the case of this large migration project I'm doing of a bank going into the cloud, the spirit of the engagement is to get into the cloud. That's the spirit of the engagement. How we're going to get there is going to change dramatically. We don't know at the beginning exactly the actual path to get there. We know the roughed in parts, but we don't know all of the different variations of the theme. So the teams need to be told it's safe to deviate from the norm, as long as the deviation is explored and contained, because sometimes you got to avoid someone going too far afield, but ultimately you want to create an environment that shows they're safe to bring up these ideas and innovation, but always doing a checkpoint that says, are we meeting the spirit of the engagement? Now, if it's a very complex engagement, you might have 4 or 5 deliverables along the way, and each one, the deliverable is the goal. And you need to allow for variance to get there. Those are the projects that always become successful. And those are the projects that typically not only get the benefits that they thought they were going to get, they typically get more benefits because they've been able to alter the culture of the players that got them there. And that becomes also critical, is that those Brave New World engagements allow you as the PMO to engage team members that allows them to explore so that they can expand their horizons. So allow them to lift their head a bit to see what's going on around them. So another way of looking at the same graphic is when you sit back and you're looking at what you're trying to do, you're looking at it and you're saying, okay, is this innovative or it's operational? So you're kind of doing that, and then you're trying to see, okay, what pattern is going to give me the highest level of success? So I always look at it from the engagement perspective up. So for the engagement itself, is it Brave New World or rinse and repeat? Just mentally do that in your head. Has the institution done this before? If the answer is yes, then you're probably going to lean a little heavier into rinse and repeat, but you have to ask yourself, is it really the same that we've done before, or does it just look like it's the same? Going to my comment earlier about infrastructure as a service and then going into the cloud, is it really the same or is it different? And the stakeholders are who you have to flush that out with. It's not the PMO's responsibility to give the answer, it's the PMO's responsibility to facilitate getting the answer. So again, you become that coach to the organization that says, okay, what's really going on here? Is the PM assigned aligned? So if you have a PM that's very details oriented, is an amazing at checklist, is just absolutely the PM that is very details oriented, is an innovative project that's Brave New World where there's many, many unknowns, is that individual going to be in their comfort zone, or is that individual going to be struggling to keep up the energy required to deal with the deviations from the norm? On the inverse of that is, if you have a really strong coaching style PM that is very much into working with teams and finding out where the gaps are and doing all of those other things, putting that individual on a very details oriented, you've got a rollout of 350 sites that all look the same, you just got to do, scheduling and logistics and coordination. Is that individual the right person to assign for that engagement? So is the PM aligned? More importantly, is the PMO aligned? So if you're a serving PMO and this is Brave New World, you're going to have to get out of your comfort zone and get into more of a controlling mode if you actually want to see some of these gaps get filled. So the PMO themselves is going to have to break the mold. Or is this when they're strong on the controlling side and they're used to always having their way, and they're saying, you know what, I need to back off a bit because the engagement team is highly qualified to do this. I just need to be a partner in the process. Then that's the PMO decision that needs to be made. And those are the things that the leaders of a PMO need to understand at time. Not everything's the same. And certain engagements, the team itself is who you look to says, okay, what does this team need to be successful? And you as the ultimate facilitator who runs the PMO, you need to actually be built accordingly. And then organizationally, and this is an interesting one because again, I've built 4 PMOs, each one in different industries and each one with completely different organizational structures. But what was always interesting was that if an organization is operationally focused, you educate them by showing them how to exploit the opportunities. That's how you educate them on the value of a PMO. Then, as they start to find their legs and they get comfortable with the vernacular, and as they start to understand how this all works, Then you say, oh, for this engagement, we're going to change the rules, but it's a variation of what we already know. And it's because we're very innovative, right? And this particular thing that you're about to do is you've never done it before. So we need to make some alterations. Now, another one that I went to, startup business, and everything had to be whiteboard and everything had to be reinvent the wheel. And it was like, okay, I get your culture, but you're putting in a financial system. Okay. And financial systems are pretty much, you know, you want to stick to the basics or you're going to get yourself into trouble, and you want to stick to the tried and true. So, yep, totally get you on the innovative side. The PMO office is going to be very, very cool with that. But you're putting in a financial system. There's lots of rigor. There's lots of this. There's lots of that. Why don't we just kind of, for this engagement, why don't we just peel you back a bit and give you some operational things that you need to do? And from that perspective, they start to see that it is a push and a pull. It doesn't have to be always one way. And that's where I find some, especially large institutions that have, again, to what Mark spoke about earlier, have a very deep background in operational efficiency, banks, financial institutions, lots of oversight, governments, is like there's a high level of comfort in staying in the status quo. Yet organizationally, they want to start breaking the mold of status quo. So how do you get them from there? Well, you pick people that know how to do a lift. You don't pick people that just know how to carry. You pick people that are comfortable in the uncomfortable. You do small engagements to make them successful, but also to demonstrate to the organization success can be had. And to Kevin's point specifically, it's all about benefits-based. Get them to focus on a benefit, not the tasks. Have that benefit realized, and then the organization says, okay, I get it now. But they don't, if they knew, the other saying I have is, if they knew how to get there, they'd have got there already, right? Institutions, they just need to be shown the way, okay? And the other saying I have, and again, it can be heard differently by different people, is if you were born in prison, would you actually know you're in prison? And it seems kind of funny, but give that some thought. Would you actually know you're in prison? And a lot of institutions don't know they're in prison. So that's why, as the PMO, you always have influence. You can tell them that the doors that you think that are locked aren't actually locked. So similar to my OODA loop and similar to my orange conversation, I always have the capability maturity model in the back of my head. So whenever I'm walking in, either creating a PMO or renovating a PMO, I always take a step back, and I believe individuals on the panel were talking about the maturity model, is where is everybody in the maturity model? I've been in way too many organizations that are operationally fantastic in a particular area, whatever that area is. They're manufacturing, or they do something, they do it exceptionally well. And the comment I'll push back to the executives is, you have $100 to spend, and you're spending $90 of that on something you're already good at, and you're only going to move your maturity model incrementally. I can take that same $90 and move it into an area that you're not operationally good at, and you're going to move the needle a lot. And it goes back to Mark's comment about changing the OPEX model to the CAPEX model, right? Is changing their focus on where do you want to spend money versus where do you want to invest money. So when you shift the focus from things that you need to improve and get better at, then you're investing. You're taking that $90 and you're investing in your future. You don't necessarily know if I'm going to get immediately $90 value back from it, but I'm building something to be built upon, and that's that investment model. It's for future proofing. It's to go out there. Or I can just spend $90 on what I'm really good at, and I'll just pretend to spend $10 to improve the other side, and you'll never actually improve the other side marginally. Like, you can't get large movements forward. So what does this all mean, right? So it's tales from my journey, okay? When you're building a PMO, which is critical, what's the maturity level of the organization? And honestly self-reflect, not just from a PMO's perspective, but even from an organization perspective. There are lots of successful organizations out there that are very immature in how they do business. They drink from a fire hydrant, the money just keeps coming in, and they are as dysfunctional as the worst episode of reality TV, but they just don't know it yet. So you need to actually see where they are. Then what is the problem the PMO is being asked to solve? So in the case of the transportation company, I was being brought in because they were starting to pick up speed on acquisitions. They were doing acquisitions and it was taking 18 months to 2 years to do an acquisition. And they recognized that the path to success was more acquisitions, but they understood that if they continued down this path, they weren't going to be able to be successful at it because it was just crushing the organization from a resource perspective. So that was the impetus. What's the problem we need to solve? Well, you don't solve it day one, but I never let them forget that that was the reason for you saying we need to take a higher maturity level with this. So they were in transportation, so they had transportation type projects, they had construction projects in regards to building buildings, they had acquisition projects, they had IT projects, they had accounting projects, but they were all scattered. So we built small, built the PMO, did the next acquisition, showed them that there's a template behind it. And then by the end of it, they were doing 5 acquisitions a year. And I think now they're probably doing 7 or 8 a year. And they've got a PMO culture across the whole organization. So now even the PMO manages all the major projects and even the minor ones. So major construction projects, minor building renovations, leasehold improvements, so on and so forth, to going to Office 365. So from that perspective, where is it? And from a building perspective, I always say, when individuals look at a whiteboard, you need to find people that when they look at a whiteboard, they see opportunity. When you want to go find people that know how to do a lift, but are creative in their nature. So a lot of individuals are very good at what they do. I mean, they're exceptionally powerful at what they do. But if you show them a whiteboard, they don't know where to start. I'm good at my craft, but I don't know what to do. Those are the types of individuals that are phenomenal when you get to the end state, or at least a steady state, and they can carry it for you. And are you going to build it organically? So you're going to build it small, or are you going to build it strategically? And that is a key thing, because strategically means that the stakeholders are already understood what the end state looks like. They just don't know how to get there. Organically is you need to work with your stakeholders to educate them on what this looks like. And then organically, you're going to build it and then have them look through the rearview mirror. And both of them are successful. But you need to, as individuals, need to look at your teams doing that. And I cannot stress this enough. Of all the transformation projects I've done, all of the organizational change engagements I've ever done, you need to clearly start early with your organization to confirm what the word lift versus carry means. A lot of organizations do not understand that there is a world of difference between doing a lift versus a carry. Hence, organizations that use consultants to help them with the lift tend to be far more successful than those organizations that use consultants for the carry. Because carry is institutional knowledge. I need to know how to manage this to go forward. I may never need to know this skill again to get me from 0 to 1. I may never need to know that skill again, but I need to know the skill that says, now that I'm at 1 and I want to make the best one possible, that's a different set of skills. That's institutional knowledge. You tend to want to keep that inside your walls. But I'm going to do this thing I'm only going to do once. That's where you can leverage the skills of others. And then the process is about templates. Template it, template it, template it. Tools, again, start small. Excel works. I know it's the devil incarnate. I am the one person out there that just absolutely has technical Tourette's every time somebody hands me a spreadsheet with a project plan on it. I just get Tourette's when I see it. But then I have to take a step back and say, that's where they are in the process. That's where they are. And so we'll work with what we've got. And does the tool set fit the needs? Right? So all too often, people chase the tool and not what's the problem you're trying to solve. So the culture of your organization is, are they tool junkies? And if they're tool junkies, be careful, because it's the next distraction. Or are they focused on the business and they just want the right hammer to put in their hand? And those, again, those are things that the PMO can bring forward. And people, builders and not maintainers. So if you're building a PMO, the the most challenging thing you'll be faced with is having people on the team that are good at steady state, but just have no idea how to get you there. And they'll speak the right language, they'll use the right words, but they will not be able to give you that leadership that you need to achieve that goal. Renovating. This is always the most challenging one because it exists. Probably been successful, but everybody knows it's just not lining up properly. It's just not doing what everybody needs it to do. So that's where that OODA loop comes in and says, okay, what's working versus what's not working? So, you know, if I looked at the parts manifest of an existing PMO and it has all the parts for success, why isn't it successful? Then that's where you need to understand, you know, what needs to be changed. And that's where things need to be measured and you know, how is the PMO being rewarded? Because people always tend to lean in to what they get rewarded on. So if they're being rewarded operationally, they're not going to want to deviate from that. If they're being rewarded for the benefits, then you're going to want to lean into that. So what is their vision? What is the vision? What is their execution pattern? Where is it headed? What is working? What is struggling? All too often when I get brought into a PMO, there's been some level of trust that's been lost, or it's a level of trust that's been strained, and everybody wants to focus on the part that's broken. And sometimes it's pretty obvious as to what's broken, but they fail to take the wins for what is working. Like if you started at 0 and the PMO gave you some success and now it's struggling, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? What is working, and don't abandon that just for the sake of change. And more importantly is, how are opportunities identified? All too often, PMOs take on too much responsibility, and they're the ones that they believe are tasked with finding the opportunities. And you have to be careful there. You want to be the facilitator of creating opportunities and at least identifying them from the team's perspective upwards. And that's the one time, sometimes PMOs can get in their own way, and they need to take a step back and say, okay, what's my role, right? And who's trying to speak and what message is trying to get out. And again, it goes back to, and Mark speaks about it a lot, is when you're focused on the operation and operational efficiency, sometimes you lose sight of the opportunity that's right beside you. Like it's right beside you. Just stop, take a breath. It's right there. But if you don't let the stakeholders know that opportunity exists, how would they know it exists? Right? They need you to facilitate that conversation. As the PMO, you are ultimately responsible for if the people are aligned. If someone on the team is struggling, it's your responsibility to identify what the struggle is. Is the struggle knowledge? Is the struggle personality? Is the struggle just misunderstanding? Those are the PMO's responsibility, both for their own team members, but as the project team as a whole. All too often, PMOs are, yeah, but they don't report to me. Yeah, that's fair. The person doesn't report to you, but they do report to the project, and you represent the project. So sometimes it's about getting out of the working group, right? You're stuck in a working group and you have an individual that is stuck in a loop, and we're enabling the loop to last too long. You need to get it out of the working group, bring it to the steering committees, and break the log jam. That's the things you need to understand even when you're renovating. Are the processes aligned? Is the process there because it needed to be there 10 years ago? Or does it need to be there today? And it's just a process. If you can look at the process that says, does it need straightening? Do I need to straighten the string of the process? Or am I not just being compliant? If I was compliant, the process would work. So that goes back to, I believe it was Gary's comment that said, you need to enforce the rules, right? If you enforce the rules, the processes work. If you don't enforce the rules, the processes fail. Building a new process isn't going to solve that problem. Fixing the one that's there is going to work. Or sorry, adhering to the one that's there. And the last one, and it's the one, and I say this with full disclosure, anybody that knows me, I'm a Milwaukee tools junkie. I'm a DIYer. I've probably got every Milwaukee cordless tool that they make, and I'm talking, I got a lot of them. So I am a tool junkie, but I always ensure that my tool aligns to the purpose. I have never bought a tool that I've never used, nor have I bought a tool just to build a project. So what I mean by that is, it's okay to be tools focused, but if the tool is the distraction, then be careful. And I'm going to say a phrase that I learned from HP in my early ITIL days, because again, I'm a silverback. a fool with a tool is still a fool. And I say that not to be rude, but it is an observation. A tool for the sake of having a tool benefits no one. A tool in the hand of a craftsperson actually creates work, creates the benefits that you were looking for. So does the tool fit the purpose? And again, as much as I get Tourette's, Excel can be that tool. But all too often, people want to renovate the PMO, and the first thing they attack is the tool. And I always ask, is the tool wrong, or is how you're using the tool wrong? And that is a difficult question to answer, but it needs to be answered honestly. Because in the particular environment that I'm working in now, I was brought in to transform a managed services company. They had a tool that helped them with their service desk, and that service desk tool actually had a project management component to it as well. It was rudimentary. It wasn't very good. It wasn't a Jira. It wasn't a full project MS project implementation, but it had the fundamentals of being a good project tool. So use the tool you have. Then you'll grow out of maturity. So I call that transition technology. How do you transition away into something better? So sometimes putting the perfect tool in that's at the end state is too much for an organization. It's just, I'm just using Excel, and now you want me to use Jira as an example. Yeah, Jira may be the answer, but you're not there yet. Like, you're not mentally there yet. So you need something to get you through transition. And that's where a lot of organizations need to understand that there's people behind all of this, and the people need to be guided through the process.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Tim. We're out of time, but I'll give you 2 minutes to wrap it up.
The slide says it all. So,
well, give you 2
just
minutes to go through the slide.
Yeah. So basically, what's the culture? What's the project management office culture? Is it rinse and repeat? What's your time horizon? And the takeaways, again, I can't stress enough: the orange conversation, the OODA loop, the maturity model, and the last word I tell everybody on every team I've ever worked on: in the absence of leadership, lead. There's a gap, fill it. Somebody will follow you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Tim. That was insightful. I learned a lot. I had a lot of fun, and you were entertaining as well. So that was really good. Thank you. Thank you kindly.